time management. I mean, there are also other reasons why, especially since we're on tape here. I will point out that there are reasons that in the classroom setting, there's credit hours, so we really have to go the entire session, and that's important to do, and I do. I mean, I have ever ended a session early if I felt that, for example, once in a while in my speech courses, not in any other course, and I generally don't end early in other courses, but in speech courses, I do workshop sessions. So these are opportunities for students to practice their speeches, opportunities for students to prepare their speeches, and there may be a time when a student, for example, needs to go to the library to get something. I certainly don't stop them from doing that. I start the workshop maybe 30 minutes before the end of class, and students will start working, and if they find that they need something else, they'll leave at that point. So occasionally I'll do something like that. But we have to be very conscious, not just professors, but whenever we're giving a speech, we always have to be very conscious of time. Actually, that's a formal criteria for learning effective public speech. We call it chronemics, how we use time to communicate. And that has to do with how fast we talk, it has to do with how we incorporate pauses, but it also has to do with reading an audience, right? I mean, how exhausted are they or overwhelmed are they with what we're saying, or how engaged are they with what we're saying? I mean, ideally, if an audience is engaged and there are no parameters, you can go on as long as you want. But if an audience is not engaged, you have to engage. You have to engage in the process of reading them and figuring out, okay, are they bored? Do they disagree? Are they lost and confused? So, reading an audience is part of that skill. Is that answering the question? Is that in the direction of, like, sometimes, sometimes it's a better choice to move past something, and you might have to make that decision on the fly. I thought this would be a really interesting, motivating, persuasive part of the speech, but people aren't connecting with it. You have to roll with that. Speech is a performance, and it's something that happens in the here and now, and we have to be able to take feedback as we speak. One of the reasons I make, for example, in speech class, one of the reasons I make such a big deal out of eye contact is because that's the only means through which we can connect with the audience while we're giving all of this information. If they're bored, or if they are angry, that's the only way we'll know. And then you want to adjust, I mean, the ability to adjust to the room is critical. Like I said at the beginning, this idea of if you come in and you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself, let's say you have a job interview, or a job talk, as they say, and it's essential that I get this job, I have to get this job, and you're very worried about it. You're building up the stress, and you're doing being engaged in this activity of trying to control outcomes and not worrying about the present moment. And you're starting to get yourself worked up, and you go in and you hit the audience with that. And I do mean hit them. Like, we have this aura of stress that we can project, and then gets projected back on us. That's not going to go well. You've already set a bad emotional tone in the room. You want to approach the audience in a casual, friendly, relaxed sort of way, and that will get projected back at you. It's kind of uncanny how that works, I think. This idea that you don't even have to say a word and you can set a tone. It's kind of like you can feel it. And I don't know, I think a lot of that has to do with being comfortable with your content, having practiced your content, and being comfortable with yourself. And I'm not going to leave it with vagary like that. Just be comfortable with yourself. Yeah, I mean, I'm very literal when I mean that. I don't necessarily mean that in some existential way. I mean, go practice in the speech lab. Watch yourself on video, as uncomfortable as it may be. Watch yourself on video. Watch yourself and practice in the mirror so that you can adjust in real time to make a better performance. It's not comfortable at first, I understand that, but that's what I mean by get comfortable with yourself. It's like a literal activity as opposed to a more abstract philosophical idea of being at peace with yourself in the world. No, desensitize. Expose yourself to yourself, and that will help with anxiety. And I think that works not just for public speaking. It works for a lot of different things. It goes back to Professor Cartagno's concept of do math every day. Back to the issue of language learning, and my own experience is it's kind of an obvious point, but the more scenarios you bump into, the more comfortable you are speaking. The more different kinds of subjects you have to talk about, the more you reinforce the structure of the language and the vocabulary of the language, for example. So we get good at learning a language, we get good at doing math, we get good at speaking in public from doing it. Like kind of John Dewey concept is that you learn what you do. We learn from our own behaviors, and it's impossible to become excellent at something in the abstract. It has to be a physical thing that you do every day, or often in any case, like exercise for staying fit. You can't do that once a month and expect to have results. It has to be something that's perpetual. The same thing is true for public speaking or math or whatever it might be.
Well, I have the last question.
Yeah.
Do you think music affects the way your brain retains information now in math or in public speaking, but in any other subject? Do you think music affects? Because I hear people who says I can study the music and I can do it, but I don't know if that affects the way your brain retains information.
Are you talking about the confidence?
Studying music, like hear music.
One more time.
Like studying while you're hearing music.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I honestly, I have not looked at the research on that. Listening to music while you're studying, yeah, I have not. I don't know. I will say this, and I have mixed I have to specify mixed feelings about this idea, but music, if you look at the troubadours, it's ancient news people who would move from village to village learning and singing songs to share the medieval news of the day. They did that with music. So there is a logic to this. I understand, not listening to it, but singing it, it might be a little bit different. And that may be an excellent study technique, by the way. I mean, putting things to music, if you're inclined to do that. But there are memory. I mean, in public speaking, I know I said not to do this, but there is a school of thought. I don't necessarily subscribe to it, but there is a school of thought that memorization is actually the way to go when you're giving a speech. Memorizing the speech is a good idea. I think for if you're very anxious and there's a chance that you could lose your place, I don't think it's a good idea. But there are mnemonic techniques that we actually, a couple of us are aware of in the speech lab, and we can teach for learning, for memorizing content. And the reason I mention this is because of what you said about music. The troubadours embedded content in rhythm, in song, and so they were able to remember vast amounts of information, allegedly up to 1,000 words, hearing it only one time, and be able to repeat it just based on some of these mnemonic techniques, including putting things to music. There's another one called memory theater, or there's another name for this, it's escaping me right now. But in any case, you imagine a physical space and you embed information throughout that physical space.
Palace, the memory palace.
Ah, there you go.
Palace, yeah.
So yes, where did you learn that? Just from general knowledge. Very good, very good. I was hoping it was one of my people, but yeah, the memory theater, the memory palace. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is how if you look at like medieval churches, cathedrals, prior to the age of literacy and writing, monks would use the cathedral as a physical space to learn stories and then take a walk in their head through the cathedral to repeat stories. So you can do that without building a cathedral. You can embed information in a physical space by making associations between facts and objects, And then going to take the test, quite frankly, is nothing more than taking a mental trip through your house. I mean, we can all do this right now, right? I mean, you can sit down and imagine walking in your front door, going up the stairs, going into the kitchen, into the living room, walking down the hall into your bedroom. So just imagine if you associate particular areas or subjects or facts with different objects in your house. You've just hacked the issue of studying in a sense. It's not something that gets talked about, I think, in courses, in courses in general, but also even in studying. It's kind of something that somehow gets skipped over, but it's a really wonderful technique. And it can be used, you can see the immediate value of it to something like public speaking. I mean, I would contend that any of us right here could use this technique to learn the content of their speech, and even without an outline, without note cards, just be able to stand up and go through a subject by mentally taking a trip through facts in some physical space. So it's an interesting associational mnemonic learning type device. We do have, we can cover that. It depends on who you have in the speech lab, but we can cover that in there and help to make associations and to memorize really vast amounts of content. Maybe not limitless, but the brain is almost limitless in terms of how much you can retain if you encode it in a logical way, using space, for example, meaning your house, or using any kind of cognitive map. You can learn a lot of content, and then it just becomes a matter of finding it. That's the problem. I mean, most of it's not a problem of encoding information. It's a problem of retrieving it. So I have to find a way to retrieve the information, and that's where memory palaces can be very useful. Or other tricks. I think the memory palace is really the best of the mnemonic devices. There's other things like number to letter coding and the musical example I mentioned a moment ago, and acronyms and acrostics and various different mnemonic techniques, but all very useful if you have a lot of information to memorize. I think the least stilted or difficult is the memory palace. But I think, to return to your original question, I would say, I don't want to. I certainly wouldn't discourage anybody from listening to music while studying it. But that's something I think depends on the person. And if it works for you, don't stop it. Don't stop it. Keep going. Anything else? Alrighty. Thank you. You've been a good audience. A small but good audience.
Nice.
Okay.
Mm.